We will start by a brief introduction to the webinar. Then there will be a presentation on impact pathways, which covers materials that were already prepared. Then there will be a Q&A where you are very welcome to bring your questions. Then there will be a short exercise, presentations on indicators, monitoring and measurement, again Q&A. Then we will be sharing insights from case studies. There will be a briefing, exchange on key takeaways and checkout. So I think we have everything for a great session here today. And once again, thank you for coming. And without further ado, I will pass the word to Elina. Hi, Elina. Thank you.
So a word to Jelena first to introduce a little bit our team.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Just to make two faces visible from FS Center, I will start the day. So welcome once again, and welcome to an exciting topic of impacts. Elina and myself have been working on the topic for a number of years. And we are glad to share that experience with everybody who has gathered this morning. We represent FS Center, European Future Innovation Systems Center. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a not-for-profit research lab based in Brussels. We have several strands of work, but a lot of it is focused around evaluations and impact assessment in the field of research and innovation, covering individual institutions, national systems, and research infrastructures in particular. We've covered topics of strategy development for research infrastructures, monitoring and evaluation frameworks, as well as impact assessment, and in particular focusing on socioeconomic impacts. Over the years, and especially during the pandemic, we have also extended our toolkit of participatory evaluation techniques and some novel impact assessment methods. So this is a day to get a bit of information about that, and we're always here to answer more questions. But for today, Anna has already briefed us. What we set ourselves as an objective for today is for you to get acquainted with methods around impact pathways, to get some insights on indicators, monitoring and measurements, learn hands-on from Elixir case studies, and perhaps start thinking about the stages and planning the stages for impact assessment process that you can place in your organization. And more importantly, it's not on that slide, but we should have fun, because to make impact assessment and creation of impact pathways as non-linear as possible and capture as many impacts as possible, we need to be more creative, more open, and more engaged. So welcome again. And on that note, I pass the word to Elina. Thank you.
Yes, I also start sharing the screen. So if you can,
I can't get out of my screen now. No, I'm here.
So I'll share my screen. Yes, 1 second. So my task today is actually to set the scene for the topic. And as you all have gathered today, I think there's a great interest in the topic of impact, but it's also a complex topic. So my task this morning will be in this first briefing to break down a little bit this complexity and give you some concepts, some definitions, and some approaches how to define and scope impact, and especially this societal impact that reaches beyond the more known approaches how to deal with scientific impact. So the presentation I'm giving this morning is based mainly on a very dedicated Horizon 2020 project that was dedicated specifically to this topic, but we also bring in our knowledge working together with various impact research infrastructures on impact. So there will be a mix of our learnings from this side. So to set the context, basically to set the context, I think you all have noticed that the considerations about these socioeconomic impacts, so these broader impacts that research infrastructures generate, are gaining an increasing importance, specifically in policy-making circles. But I also think that many organizations have recognized that we have to better understand the impact that is created by research infrastructures beyond scientific impact. And also because research infrastructures are eager also to communicate, what is the value added the organizations are bringing not only to scientific field, but to society more broadly. But while there is this increasing emphasis on understanding better impact, there has been a lack of very clearly defined guidelines of how to do an impact assessment and how to think about an impact assessment, and specifically from policymakers and funding agencies. So there's this gap with in what we see in the last decade. So what has been done in the last decade, there have been a very different interpretations on how to understand and define these broader impacts, and hence also very diverse methodologies have been used and applied to scope and measure impacts. In most cases, research infrastructures have tried to scope the economic impact, think about the impact on innovation. So you might have seen case studies of various economic modeling approaches or cost-benefit analysis done. But it all has been sort of ad hoc attempts, while the more unified overview, what are the comprehensive impacts from research infrastructures, has been clearly lacking. For this reason, European Commission have noticed this gap, and they also formulated the need, well, we need a more unified framework of how to approach it and how to talk about it. So this is also the birthplace of a Horizon 2020 project, RIPath, our Research Infrastructure Impact Assessment Pathways. And it was a project that was funded by Horizon 2020 and was run for 30 months from January 2018 to June 2020. And it convened, so it teamed up two groups of, I think, expertise. So experts from policy and evaluation field, and then really dedicated research infrastructures. Elixir was one of these research infrastructures. So together with this consortia, we have really, I think, made a step change in understanding impact from research infrastructures. And this is also what I want to share with you this morning. So briefly, what was the mission of the project? The mission was highly conceptual. The idea was that we need to improve the understanding of what are these long-term impact pathways, or these logical chains of how various research infrastructures trigger effects in broader society and economy. So it was a broad conceptual goal, but our objective was actually very practical. So we wanted to make sure we make this step change in improving our understanding, but we wanted to really provide some very practical tools to policymakers, funders, and research infrastructure managers on how to deal with impact, of how to assess it, and how to start to think about it. So all in all, the output was, we were really tuned to make sure the output is really practical. The approach of the project was highly participatory. Yes, we had 8 project partners, but in fact, we realized that the knowledge we have to integrate in order to talk about this topic in more comprehensive manner means that we need to gather knowledge from very broad range of experts and research infrastructure stakeholders. So we ran around 9 participatory workshops and convened around 130 stakeholders in order to co-design sort of a more comprehensive framework for socioeconomic impact of research infrastructures. So all in all, there was an effort 2 years to bring these parties together and to discuss around the table various insights. And one of the working principles was that we needed to think about impact, but we needed to think about all types of research infrastructures and really reflect the specificities that various research infrastructures are having. So we had to take into account various missions, various types, and various phases of development that research infrastructures have. And also, while it was a European attempt, so it was a European project, our goal was actually to make sure this effort contributes towards a more common approach also at the international level. So we reached out not only European stakeholders, but talked also with stakeholders across the oceans, so from Australia to Canada and US, to make sure that we're really developing something that is applicable not only in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So to cut it short, the basic building block of this project was to think about impact pathways. So I mentioned impact pathways. So what is an impact pathway, and what's the logic behind this approach? Impact pathway logic is simple, but it's not simplistic. It basically entails a mapping out of very causal chains of how resources and activities that research infrastructure is devoting, how resources the research infrastructure is devoting to carry out certain activities, how it leads to direct results. So this is something that all research infrastructures have under their control, right? This is something that you plan in your daily activities. This is also what you account for. And this is something that, you know, the management of the research infrastructure is having a good overview. So we put in resources to carry out certain activities, and we strive to receive certain direct results, which we call outputs. But the important thing is that these outputs are only relevant when stakeholders interact with these results and take up in their daily work. And this is something that is a bit longer term effect. So we call these outcomes. So there could be a shorter term outcomes and longer term outcomes. And what it means in impact pathway logic, that this is something that the research infrastructure is striving to achieve. So this is sort of an objective, but this is not directly under the control of research infrastructure management. This is something that we hope that beneficiaries and stakeholders will uptake the results and actually use the direct outputs from the activities. But what our topic of the today is actually even further down the line. So once there are these outcomes achieved, it's actually only with when people engage with a broader context and environment that we can talk about impact. Impact is a much broader term. It means an effect on society, on economy. So it might be a contribution to these broader effects. So this is the sphere of interest. This is the sphere of interest of policymakers. This is the sphere of interest to understand by research infrastructures. But the important thing is that there is no control by research infrastructure managers to really carve out this impact. To give you a bit more, maybe a bit more practical example how this impact pathway logic looks like in reality, take an example of communication activities. I think this is something that most of research infrastructures are doing it to a larger or smaller scale, but definitely these activities are present. So in order to do that, you definitely need some funding, you need skilled staff, and you need knowledge of the staff in order to implement communication activities. So let's say there are a range of communication and public outreach activities that research infrastructure is carrying out. So what are the direct results? Most likely the direct results, and this is something you would definitely count in your reporting, we would try to, first of all, understand the number of events organized, the number and type of stakeholders reached by these events. So you would actually look at perhaps an educational visits that are conducted. So you would count the events and the participants that are taking part in these events. So this would be your direct result from the activities you're carrying it out. What the interest lies, though, is not only in terms of the events carried out, but actually the bit longer term effects of these events. So when we talk about outcomes, that what is really the strategic aim is probably to increase public awareness of science and improve the understanding of how the specific research infrastructure is contributing to society. So this is really the strategic aim. While it's not under direct control of the people organizing these activities, this is what they eventually are striving to achieve, right? But impacts, what policymakers and what funders would specifically look into is not only the outcomes, but rather what is the contribution then to more societal effects. So we could say impacts could be, yes, from a better public awareness about science. There could be an increased trust in science. There could be also increased scientific literacy of society as such. We could even think that because of this increased scientific literacy, more students are interested and attracted to scientific careers. So there could be lots of long-term effects. It doesn't mean that the outcomes are the only ones that contribute to these impacts, right? It's not that because of this specific activity there is a better public awareness and there will be suddenly increased trust, but it's definitely contributing to this impact. So all in all, the chain of the causality is very long, but it's the aim of this exercise is to map out this chain, to really outline what are the assumptions and what are our understanding of the way the causalities are triggered, and to map it out quite schematically. While at the moment it looks quite simple logic chain, the reality of impact pathways is actually quite complicated because it's not a linear chain of causality, right? There could be very direct results of activities that lead to various outcomes. It could be 3, 4, 5 different outcomes. And these outcomes can lead to even more impacts, right? So it's all in all, an achieved impact could actually have a feedback loop and trigger, again, a different round of activities that are carried out. So all in all, the impact pathways are not linear, they're quite complex. And what we came up as a best metaphor to sort of conceptualize this dynamic of impact pathways is a analogy with a tree. So I think this is perhaps the best describing the dynamic process of how impacts can be scoped. So if you think about the resources and activities that research infrastructure is devoting, it could be titled that these are the roots of the tree, right? And the direct results from these activities could be the trunk, so the outputs. This is something very concrete, something that we know that grows from the roots is the trunk. But what defines really the tree is not only the trunk, that's the height of the tree. What really defines the tree is the trunk and the branches. The branches are further coming out from outputs, so these bit longer term results from direct results, and outcomes are actually the element that really defines the tree. right? This is where we can see the shape of the tree coming up, and this is very important area for making sure that these ones are understood and measured. And when it comes to impacts are the leaves and the blossoms. They are very hard to quantify. They are very volatile, so they can come up in spring and then they fall in the fall. It's very hard to really put a finger of how many leaves do you have. But all in all, when we think about the tree, it's all together. It's the trunk, the branches, and the leaves. When we think about an image of a tree, so you can't put a finger on impact so clearly and rationally. This is what we are striving to achieve for a beautiful picture of a tree. So when we think about an impact pathway, the previous logical chain, maybe the best metaphor would be to move the tree 90 degrees to the right. And this would be approximately the type of chains or causal chains we are thinking when we think about an impact pathway. So there isn't very clear direct outcomes, but there's a lot of linkages and a lot of branches and sub branches that really lead to impacts. So it is complex, but it's only as complex if we want to capture the entire scope of a tree. But if you think about that, you need to understand better just the major branches and to understand how they are related to the leaves. Then it becomes a bit more graspable as a concept. So this is what we were trying to do in our RIPath project. We wanted to draw these impact pathways for all types of research infrastructures. So what are the general logical causal chains that are happening? And the results of the project were all gathered in an online toolkit, because we promised that we will not end the project with a PDF document that isn't usable and isn't navigable. We gathered all our results in an online toolkit, and the toolkit is available in this link. It's ripath.tool.eu. Perhaps Jelena can also paste in the chat for you to quickly check. And the tool can be used both ways. So it can be used by people who have almost no knowledge on the topic. So they can start by exploring from the introduction until more extended information on various case studies. But it can also be used by people who have some knowledge on the topic, but they just want to dig up some specific guidelines or some specific additional information, for instance, on indicators or on various methods, what to use to quantify that or measure the impact. So there is an accompanying guidebook to the tool, which is a PDF document, but it's a PDF document with a lot of links. So I suggest all of you who are interested in the topic would like to read, a nice 30-page document from one side to the end. This is a very good introductory material, but it has all links to all various interesting use cases and pilot experiences, as well as has links to further information. So it's really an interactive tool to use to get in, digging into the topic more deeply. I do really recommend for you to look into the tool, but as I don't have all the time in the world to explain all the details there, I will just give you a glance into one of the key contributions from the project that you can also explore in the tool in more detail. So what we came up with within the project, we identified 13 generic impact pathways, how investments in research infrastructures lead to various impacts on economy and society. generic in a way that they are high level, they are understandable at a high level, and they are applicable to most of the research infrastructures and can be sort of understood by most of the infrastructures in their logic. And we group these pathways along 3 high-level missions of research infrastructures. So the more primary mission, enabling science. So what are the processes, interactions that stem from this basic mission? Then there's also emphasis on the problem solution. So many applied research infrastructures interact with industry as well as government organizations and NGOs in order to provide certain solutions. There's a lot of interactions that create impact from these activities. And then we also looked at more abstract but not less interesting linkages between science and society and what interactions really create impact in this area. So I can't go into detail on all 13 pathways, but I can give you an overview, maybe just to give you a taste of what was identified as main things, as main processes where impact is created in research infrastructures. So we looked primarily at socioeconomic impact. Scientific impact is recognized, but it was sort of embedded in this approach. It wasn't specifically an area that we looked into. So it's really about socioeconomic part of the impact. When we think about the primary mission of research infrastructures, definitely saw that, you know, the publication activities and, you know, the citations that are connected to publications, as well as recognition that is awarded to research infrastructure and outputs that come from research infrastructures is one very clear and very, I would say, quite standard way of interactions that generate impact. We also looked at employment, operations, and standardized procurement type of interactions. Obviously, technology transfer and licensing area where a lot of interactions happening that generate economic and innovation impact. A lot of interactions related to learning and training through joint development of instruments and tools between research infrastructure staff and then industry. Also learning and training by using RI facilities and services, so not only to industry, but also various other stakeholders that actually get upskilled by using these services. And then there's also interesting interactions between research infrastructure and then training and higher education cooperation that generate a lot of effects and impacts in the area of human capital and skills. I already mentioned problem solving area. So interactive problem solving for the private sector clearly has very clear impact-driven effects. Also, research infrastructure interact not only with industry, but they also interact with public sector and sometimes NGOs or very dedicated societal groups and try to solve their challenges. So this is also very much an interesting area where impact is created. I think for Elixir, as a data-driven research infrastructure, I think pathway 9 would be interesting to read for you. It's a impact created from provision of specifically curated and edited data. So this is less explored and much, and I think a very important area where understanding of how the pathways are really structured is, I think it's important to understand them more in detail. Also, we learned that especially distributed research infrastructures are really contributing to changing the fundamentals of research practice because of the distributed nature and the ways, the methodologies are contested and sometimes improved due to this distributed nature of working. We also looked at, obviously, the ways the research infrastructures create and shape scientific networks and communities. I think is also very visible, very important effect from research infrastructures. Obviously, then also interactions between science, society, and policy. So what research infrastructures and research infrastructure activities are really giving to policy area. And then as I mentioned in this very short example, communication and outreach activities for improving public awareness of science. So this is very short overview of the pathways. For if you are triggered or interested to learn more, there's on the tool there's an option you can click on each of those pathways, read about the description, and actually read about also more logic and the indicators allocated to these ones. It's I think exemplary logics of the way we might think through impact pathways. But as I mentioned, these are very high level. So it means that they serve for improving understanding of impact, but every single research infrastructure will need to tailor these generic impact pathways to their specific specificities and actually detail it much more nuanced way. But I think it's a good starting point for inspiration, for exploring, and then trying to see what is fitting to the specific situation of the organization that is looking into the support. So this is where I end. I think there's much more relevant things we can exchange in Q&A. So I think it's very important that we receive from you some messages of what would you like to understand better, what else would you like to us to, I think, detail from our experience of this project, as well as our practical experience in research in impact assessment.
Thank you, Elina. I guess on the agenda it's for me to moderate the Q&A session a little bit. I think it might be helpful to bring the slides back, and especially the pathways. We already have one question in the chat. While we're addressing this one, I'd like to ask colleagues, don't be shy. We can voice all the questions, or you can voice all the questions, we can answer them or put them in the chat. But first question was from Nick from the University of Manchester. Nick, I'm wondering if you would like to voice the question, to bring some other voices into the chat, or would you like me to?
Yeah, sure. No, just one of those last slides, it might have been the last slide, about the impact pathways. I was just wondering, that some of those descriptions sounded like they overlap categories. So I just wondered if they've been represented in kind of a Venn diagram to show the overlap.
Maybe because of the short titles, because we can't really include all the descriptive part, they might look as an overlap, but when you read the descriptions, it's actually a very specific sort of line of causal chain. So yes, indeed, we saw there is more. For instance, there's a lot of interactions that seem to happen in training, but when you categorize, the most frequent activities, you realize, well, these are the type of categories of training interactions. They're all different, and this is the reason. I think it might be from the short overview, it looks like an overlap, but no, it's not a Venn diagram approach that you will find there. Yes, but we can't go into all the logics. So this is just an invitation to read them through.
Okay, thanks.
But maybe from experience to add here, Nick, how to draw them at the end, it's probably up to the organization that does it. What we try to do with Right Paths is to give these linear examples of pathways. But what we try to do in practice with Elina and the team is to actually show how activity in one category, for example, communication type of activities, can lead to unexpected impact in, for example, impact on policy. So what we're interested a lot is to get these non-linear pathways unpacked. But before doing that, some organizations need to understand in general how the pathways are being structured. How to visualize them later, I would say one can go into different
fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Christine from SIB.
Yeah, so my question is that a lot of what research infrastructures do is very collaborative. So there is a lot of like shared tools, shared databases, training programs that are done together with different countries, different institutions. Sometimes we also work with local partners. But what our funders want is to measure the impact of the funds they put in our institution. And so sometimes you hear, yeah, but if it's so collaborative, we don't need to fund you, it will survive anyhow. Or we need, when you measure such impact, it's about a leverage. So we put like €1 in, or €1 or €1 in you. And you also need to measure the impact of all the other partners, because it's if we don't put the franc in our institution, then you wouldn't have the rest of the impact. So how do we disentangle? Is it the aim to just go with the whole impact and take the full impact of all the leveraged funds, or is the aim to be, is there different schools in it? So how does this work?
Very,
whether it's,
yeah. I think it's a very relevant aspect, and you're not the one struggling with it. I think the answer here is that there is a relevant school that says that you actually have to measure the contribution, and it's not about taking the whole impact as your achievement of the organization, but actually to see it is this impact and what is the contribution of that organization to that impact. And there are many ways to do that, but most of them involve a quite thorough narrative way of exploration. And it is one of the most interesting and one of the most crucial thing to really scope how we can tailor in general the effect of collaboration. And I think the contribution type of analysis is the way forward. At least this is what many infrastructures try to do when they are international, and their national funders want to see, but with our funding, what is the benefit for from our national funding? So they go this contribution type of assessment through it. So it is complex. It's not that it's neat. It's not that you could provide very neat quantitative figures, that contribution, but when coupled with a narrative, I think then it becomes much more stronger that yes, we are not the ones only responsible, but we are the contribution from our organization is this and this. You can still scale how much your organization is responsible for energizing the collaborations, how much you are the driver of collaborations, or rather you are the part or participant of those collaborations. So this is one way forward. It's by no means that it's neat and it's easily presentable in quantitative figures. So that's we have to leave out of the question.
Just to add to Elina's answer, you've probably noticed that in this first slides, we didn't talk about measures as such or technique-specific quantitative or qualitative techniques, we've realized in practice that before you make a case for your funders to say, for example, that €1 invested in us gives a contributive effect in collaboration with other research infrastructure, it's important to help funders understand the story. That's where this pathways approach partially is coming from, how to help narrate that story. Where does this initial €1 contribute, and where on that pathway, on that journey, you have a contribution with another research infrastructure or another research organization or somebody else. And then only once the story is in place, you can apply different measurement techniques. In the project, we've looked at different methods. So starting from cost-benefit analysis to more qualitative methods. So we looked at which stages in the pathways development or in your internal monitoring, different methods can be used. So that's also something that you can investigate a little bit further. Yes, Nicholas, I see your hand. Welcome.
I think I have
Welcome.
Yeah. The first question is very general, and now I demonstrate my lack of knowledge in this area. So I know it was this RI Paths toolkit was produced to address the societal impact, but could it also be used for sort of any impact measurement, or is it, are there things in it that makes it particularly targeted towards societal impact only? That's my first question.
Indeed, impact pathways can be applied to any impact. So you could, the same way you could map out also the interactions that happen in scientific field. What is happening in when the community talks about scientific impact, there's much more structured way to talk about it, to measure it, and actually to report on scientific impact. So it's almost like almost already predefined the way we as a community talk about scientific impact. So you will see less ways to really map out these, the logical chains. But it is true. It's the pathway approach is universal, and it is applicable to all areas. We just wanted to signal out that we were trying to do this for the areas that were less structured or understood. So the way to talk about it is now, I think, much more uniform and much more understood among various actors.
But if you look at the toolkit, there are 5 areas, if I'm not mistaken. There are some examples of scientific pathways. So the examples Elina presented, pathways leading, so economy related, then policy development, and talent development, sort of personnel. So even if we started with socio-economic impacts as start, there are, I think, 4 or 5 the most common impact areas.
Because in research infrastructure, the main objective is to support research. So that's the primary aim, enabling science, right? So we would not be even talking about wider effects if we didn't take into account the scientific activity. So, that the core things research infrastructures are meant to do. But we looked more specifically in, the triggers that scientific activities, science-related activities trigger on economy, on reputation, on policy. So we looked at those, I think, less explored rationales and chains, causal chains.
The next question is, so when should I be doing this? And listening to you, I think 10 years ago, right? And then we're in a bit of a pickle. So if I'm going to use these narratives to demonstrate impact now, I must go back and use the little information of what I remember from 10 years ago. Or I'm also in this, I guess I should formulate the narrative I want to happen in the future, but then it's the lead times are very long. Sort of. I guess we should do both. But I'm just.
You're indeed correct. In ideal scenario, the pathway thinking should be embedded into strategic operations from the start of the research infrastructure, right? But then when you start a research infrastructure, you probably don't have a full gamut of actual activities. So you might plan some activities, but you don't have them yet. But an ideal scenario, indeed, you start out with this. Maybe it will be very rudimentary ideas of possible causal chains, and you can adapt them once a real activity is taking place. But indeed, that sort of understanding and framework in ideal version should be there from the beginning of the research infrastructure. And it's an interesting process because we are working with the research infrastructures that are about to develop activities. So they're launching their operations. And we are testing how this works for research infrastructures to embed this from the beginning. But I think this thinking and this knowledge has been created at the stage where many research infrastructures have to back us, basically try to map their existing interactions. You can do it both ways, but in the ideal scenario, that would be from the beginning. Indeed.
Jessica, also, please.
Yeah, so thinking about, hey, Niklas, colleague. In a research infrastructure, exactly what you also have shown, there are a lot of activities. So all these pathways, there are different parts of the research infrastructure doing different things. So for me, for instance, that are a lot into the training activities for a research infrastructure, I have a strategy that goes in line with the infrastructure as a whole, of course. I mean, we are small parts of a larger thing, and the research infrastructure is a smaller part of an even larger thing like Elixir, etc. So is there, and maybe this is just a stupid question I'm thinking, is there a risk that, how do I maintain that whatever I do with this impact work and strategy for training, do you have any tips and tricks, and align that with the greater good, or the whole thing? Or is it a risk that it's misaligned and you kind of, or if the larger infrastructure do not do this work, but I plan to do it for this little where I actually can do it, what are the risks? It doesn't make sense maybe, but I'm just, sorry, thinking
it's a very good question, Jessica. I was looking at Corinne on my screen and Anna. That's one of these questions. Maybe we can go in deeper at the end, because I hope we will hear some snippets of practical experience from the cases from Elixir that will be presented, because that's exactly the case. And also partly answering Niklas's question that obviously these groups haven't started 10 years ago, so that's an ongoing exercise. So it will be interesting to see how it's been incorporated. And then this discussion, hub versus units in other countries. What can we observe from that? What do you think, Jessica, Corinne, Anna? Can we leave it after the cases presentation to see if we can build on that? I see the heads nodding.
Yeah, I wanted to, in fact, I'm putting it in the chat now. One of the case studies that will be presented today relates to skills and capacity building. So there is this training element. Of course, it's very specific because it's about setting up and running a massive online open course. But in any case, I think What you mean is where does your contribution fit in the broader landscape? And I think for capacity building, it's in our case at the European level, it's feeding into the digital skills agenda of the European Union. So you are contributing to that. And maybe you don't see a direct link between what you do and this collective achievement at EU level, but you are certainly contributing, and perhaps you shouldn't worry too much about the technicality. You are doing your bit, you're doing it well, and if you're assessing the impact of it that you can measure near you, that's okay. And then the bigger picture, that's a bit beyond your control. It's where it's this sphere of influence that you're having on the digital agenda of Europe in general. I don't know if I answered your question or made it even more complex.
No, thank you,
Corinne,
for me.
So we'll take it after the case studies. I think according to our program, we need to have a short comfort break now for 10 minutes.
Yes, that's. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So let's go to our energetic exercise that Jelena has prepared for us. Please, Jelena.
Yes, thank you, Anna. So we realized in the pandemic world, plus when working with the topic of research infrastructures, we need to be a bit more creative. The first thing in charting impact pathways is to decide or come up with a list of activities for your research infrastructure. And sometimes it's even difficult to chart all possible activities or all existing activities your research infrastructure does. So my creative exercise for you for today, to get outside of the box and think about the activities of a common toothbrush. You will have 40 seconds, and I will put an alarm clock, to come up with as many things, activities, one can do with a common toothbrush. And I hope this toothbrush has elixir colors. I tried, Corinne, to get it in elixir colors. So I'll paste the task in a chat. I'll set the clock up, and in 40 seconds, we'll see what we come up with. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, you're getting extra time now from me because I'm getting my screen up. And I did a mistake, sorry. This way, I'm getting my screen up and I'm starting the time. So pen, pencil, as many activities for a toothbrush. Here we go. Okay, our time is up. Usually this exercise is done for 1.5 minutes, but in the chat, can we quickly put the number? How many activities did you come up with? Just see, 11. 11, 3, 3, 3, 7, 4. Excellent job, excellent, excellent. Okay, who had, oh, Corinne, you had 11, okay. But we have to admit Corinne probably knew it 30 seconds before you. So what we'll do next? What we'll do next? Corinne, I will ask you to read out your list, activity by activity, one by one, and the rest of us have to cross out if something pops up on your list. So mine on the list is brush your teeth, right? So I'm sure everybody has it. So we cross out all the activities that we recognize. And then we'll see if there is anything that is extraordinary different in the remaining part. Corinne,
yeah, so maybe
what's your list?
But I have 5 uses, different uses of it as a highly effective precision tool. So to clean bits in the shower, you know, like not the shower itself, not yourself, obviously, to clean the sole of your boots when they're full of mud, to clean around the taps in the sink, to clean the grout on the tiling, to clean small bits on the bicycle, very important. Then I have to use as a sword, mini sword, if you're a child, to do art with paint. These are real things that have happened. Huh? To paint small bits on the garden fence, to use as a symbol that one is going away when you're brandishing your toothpaste and saying, I'm leaving, I'm going, here is my toothbrush. And finally, to trick doorstep sellers that one just cannot speak because, you know, I'm brushing my teeth, I can't speak to you, sorry, bye. So these are my 11.
Mm. Who else? Who has something else? David.
Yep, I think we should hang it from a piece of thread and submit it to a gallery of modern art under the title of 3 minutes of my life.
Ooh, excellent. Excellent 3 minutes of my life, I would add. Niklas, your addition.
Well, I don't think you said brush your teeth, Corinne. So that's one.
Oh, she didn't.
Then also clean jewelry, that's sort of covered by, I guess, what you said. Also make fake grass, cutting off the straws and fake grass things.
You can make fake elixir grass if you have orange toothbrushes, yeah? Excellent. Is that it on your list? Yeah. Emma?
I have using as a hairbrush for toy dolls or superheroes, because I've got little boys, and also for pottery making. I was doing that the other week and we used a toothbrush for making patterns on pottery.
Excellent. Jeff, what has Australia to bring us late in the evening? You'll soon be brushing your teeth.
Brushing your moustache and your beard. Also stirring paint, holding it the other way and using the handle as something to stir.
Oh, that's creative, yeah.
And just, I do a bit of sculpture, so rubbing like metal with the handle bit, so using it as a sort of flat surface.
Excellent. Thank you. Natalia?
Yes, so for my 5 list, activities have been already told, but you can use the toothbrush, like this sticky part, as a tool for measurement. But we are drawing when you are doing figural drawing, when you really like strain your hand and make measurement of like body parts. So perhaps you can use toothbrush for this.
Excellent. And I see we also have some things in the chat to use to illustrate, to use as a pointer for online presentations. It won't actually work too well, but yeah. To point a picture on Facebook and reply to anyone putting up a photo of their dinner, to clean mushrooms, clean clothes, to actively neglect in puberty, clean small scientific equipment. That's for research infrastructures. Ooh, there are more things. I will not read out everything. We're being recorded here. Cobwebs, so that's a very important part. I also wrote, when I did this exercise, because of the sticky parts, you can actually stick things if you need to hold something. So if you have it, toothbrush, and then you can put little objects in case you need to hold them. Excellent. So have you noticed that once you start getting out of the usual things, you realize that you can use it upside down? Well, that's coming from Australia, right? So that's great, upside down. Or as Nicholas said, cutting the parts. So it just shows how important it is to think a little bit broader. And also when talking about impact. So when you think about the activities your research infrastructure does, you'll start with the common set, and then you'll start thinking what else is actually there that we can prove it's leading to impacts. So great job, everybody. You can try it at home with your families or with your colleagues in the office. It's usually a fun exercise with any type of object. But now we've done the activities, Elina, we've done pathways, so we need to now talk about indicators, which is a bit tougher.
Yeah, so from toothbrushes, I think we dive directly into measurement of impact. So imagine sorry, do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. So imagine you actually have worked through an impact pathway. So one of you mentioned the training activities that you are doing, and imagine you actually work through the logic of these causal chains, and then actually from one single causal chain and actually developed into a sort of a tree-like structure, which would be, I think, a more representative graphic visualization on impact pathway. Here I wanted to sum up a couple of things about what is important to take into account when thinking about measuring it, concretely tracing it, and how do you place an indicator and where to place them. So I return back to our impact pathway graphic. This time, the simple one, the one that has a linear logic. Just talk through various types of indicators that you actually come across throughout this pathway. So the things that are under sphere of control of research infrastructure managers. So you do your activities and you actually expect very concrete results, right? So this is something you probably write down in your project reports, or also when it comes to research infrastructure in general, your annual reports. So what your activities achieved. So this is, I think, very well represented already in the data that the research infrastructures are collecting, because you can't really go without implementing activity without reporting of its actual direct effects. So this is what we would generally write as your key performance indicators of the activities. But more interestingly, what is missing in many organizations when we talk about impact is that people have these KPIs, this internal monitoring data, which is very concrete, mostly quantifiable, but they miss to connect this a bit longer term effects from the output. So this is where the aim for monitoring really is, because this is the strategic aim of the activities. When you implement it, you actually want to achieve an effect, not just direct result, right? You are looking into the effect. This is where where many research infrastructures are missing indicators, missing, I think, measurement routines. This is where most of the work, I think, needs to come into. When it comes to impacts, it actually, as we discussed already, it's a sphere of interest, but in reality, it's outside of the control or even influence. So in general, this is also outside the accountability line. So you would not be able to put, most cases, very quantifiable, provable figures to this, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a data-driven impact storyline to prove the impact. To give you more, I think, more concrete, maybe concrete definitions. So when we talk about direct results, we talk about activity indicators. We also call them KPIs. And these would allow to assess whether the right things are being done. So when we hold this training today, and many of you are organizing trainings, what we want to do, we want to training events to happen, and we want people to come, and we want probably certain type of people to come, so a target audience. This is very concrete, and this is what we capture. When it comes to more outcome indicators, this is probably something that allows to assess whether doing these right things matter. So we might hold the training event and people might come to the event, but if they don't learn anything, it's actually missing the objective, right? So our outcome is that we want people to learn something, and probably in the longer term, we want people to apply the knowledge or the skills or the insights to apply in their daily work later on. So this would be the strategic objective. So these are different type of indicators, much more difficult, I think, to capture, and they are also much less quantifiable. So imagine if you want to understand if people really learn something, you might need much more narratives, much more, I think, perception scoring and various other things to give an indication whether that happened. And when it comes to impact indicators, it's even more blurred, even less quantifiable, because what we are trying to do is we trying to allow to assess how big the overall added value of all these activities may actually be. So we want people to learn something. We come back to the training example. We want people to apply the new knowledge and skills, but what the impact indicator would try to capture is what is really changing by the application of these new skills in a broader scale. So when you think about that, what is changing in the external environment, the way organizations are run, the way policies are implemented on the basis of new skills, you might run the risk that it's hard to really define these indicators, and they are almost all are purely qualitative indicators. So we come from very quantifiable, very easily to define and very understandable to much more, I think, much more qualitative and much more fine-grained ways of putting measures to it. So this is pretty much the way we think about indicators. What is a valuable tool when you think about your indicators? And I'm coming back from, it's important for research infrastructures to really make sure that the activity indicators are understandable. And when it's not only understandable and accessible, but in many cases, these activity indicators are gathered by various departments or various people in charge of specific activities. So there'll be communication people in charge of training, people in charge of interaction with industry, people in charge of scientific activities. And the problem in many cases is that there's a lot of data, but it isn't, it isn't actually available as an overarching pool of data for people who are trying to understand impact. So that is one bottleneck that many organizations are trying to mitigate. And another thing is, as I mentioned, if we know well the activity indicators, in most cases they are clear and understandable and accessible. We need to think: do we really have enough clear enough outcome indicators that measure the strategic objectives, the things we want to achieve with our activities? And this is something I think many organizations still have work to do. So when thinking into pathway logic, you can also think through the activity indicators that you have, and what do you have and what you don't have in terms of really capturing the outcomes. And because in many cases, many of the outcome indicators are missing, or I think they are sometimes partial. So they're just an indication, but not like a very precise measure of the outcome. What is also recommended as, I think, an internal way to gather these things is performing regular surveys of stakeholders that are interacting with our eyes. So this is something where you can gain this more qualitative knowledge of what is the effect of the activity. Obviously, there is a limit to the number of surveys you can take and number of surveys you can carry out, but it's important to think which areas are strategic, where you definitely need to establish such a survey and on a perhaps on periodic and permanent basis to gather that data. So that's maybe a quick important point. And when it comes to more indications of impact, as I said, very little indicators are there that are very concrete. But narrative way of and evidence-based narratives and case study-based narratives is something that is appreciated and actually which holds a lot of value for making sure that you do have a basis for justifying the impact logic and the impact pathway. I will not go into much of the available methods, but we have, I think, came to a very uniform conclusion that to achieve the best results from assessment, it's really not working just with qualitative or just with quantitative means. It really needs to be a smart and rigorous combination of quantitative measures that you can apply, and then the qualitative impact measurement methods. And this is also where the strongest impact statements stem from, and this is also where we need to remind ourselves it will not work just one way. What is the contribution from the RIPath project that might help you when you think about your indicators? What is there and what's missing? We have not developed any extra indicators throughout the project, but what we have done, we have gathered the very long list of existing indicators that are enlisted and captured in existing projects as well as initiatives. So OECD, ESFRI, as well as various European level projects, and we did sort them. So we literally put them together. We sorted them according whether they were activity, outcome, or impact type of indicator, and also assigned them to the pathways we identified, as well as various areas of impact. So whether they were related more to human resources and skills, economy or innovation, society or policy. So on the tool, the very last tab that you have is this list of indicators, which is you can have a filtering option and literally look through. So sometimes when you miss an idea of what an indicator could be, you can reference back to this list and say, in other areas, in other research infrastructures, in other lists, they were thinking along these lines. And I think it's helpful. It will not put you exact indicator that you need, but it's definitely helpful to think about the terms that's possible to put as a measurement, as well as things that you might come across and realize, this is only in narrative format, and there is no other way to have a better measurement for that. This is just a list for you to check and for you to cross reference for your future activities. The tool also includes, in a similar manner, it's an inspirational tool when you think about your research infrastructure, your activities of the node of the research infrastructure. There's an inspiration list of the identified all areas of impacts that in general exists in literature, in case studies, in the shared experiences from the workshops we have carried out. So as well, you can click through and see, am I capturing all that there is? Can I think more? Similarly, like we went the creative exercise, it's a good tool just to cross-check if you are narrow in your thinking or there is something more that you are not really thinking about. An interesting thing is that many times research infrastructures are having impacts in areas that are not their core activity, but impacts that are simply not recognized because nobody's paying attention to it. And when it comes to communication and outlining the added value and the benefits that research infrastructures bring, sometimes you just need to open the eyes and see that there is certain impacts that happen even if you don't change anything to what is currently carried out. And I think it's important learning we also realize throughout our interactions. As well as already Jelena mentioned, there is an overview also in the tool on various data collection approaches, and as well as examples of assessment methodology, starting from very simple things like a survey, opinion polls, and various narrative-based simple techniques, to already expert-based modeling techniques and cost-benefit analysis and various, I think, much more expertise-driven approaches. This is again an inspiration tool, a reference list to check what is currently applied, what could be applied, but also in terms of to check what is simple enough to do internally and what is necessary, which approaches would need an external expertise to carry out. So this is all for your, I think, for your inspiration and for your cross-check on your specific cases and your interest, where your interest lie. But I think another important contribution that should not be underestimated, the RIPath project, yes, it did bring some better concepts, some more clarity on what the general impact pathways are. But I think the most important contribution has been that we have involved very diverse communities of people. So RI managers, impact evaluators, policymakers, funders, various experts, academics. And I think the introduction of this more shared impact assessment language has been, I think, the major contribution. And also the fact that it has forged sort of a community of practice of these people, and the cross-fertilization of learning and promotion of this common understanding is, I think, is also very, very important, subtle, but very important contribution that we try to promote also years after the end of the project. So this is mainly from theoretical point of view about assessment, but I believe you have lots of questions, a lot of unanswered issues to address, so we'll be happy to address those now.
Thank you, Elina. So now the questions about indicators, monitoring. Do you colleagues have any puzzled questions at this moment? Unless you're still coming up with ideas of how to use a toothbrush. Just maybe while you're thinking, one additional thought. Elina, we can still see your screen, but when you stop sharing. One additional thought I had when we were working on indicators as part of this project, one of our first goals was to help the community navigate themselves between KPIs, performance indicators, and impact measures. Because what we've observed, the tendency is to immediately take your performance indicators, which many of you have, either based on the funding agreements you have or some internal embedded processes, and try and see whether these indicators can be applicable to impact. So what we've tried in this first part, when coming up with the list of possible indicators for your use, is separate what is a performance indicator applicable to activity and what can be an impact measure, which is often a different thing. So if you start with that, I believe that will be a first useful exercise for you internally. Any questions? I also think that case studies will be presented
a bit later, also has a lot of learning on this allocation of how easy or how hard it is to think through the pathway thinking, but then also think through the measurement methods. And I think while it sounds, again, simple, it isn't that simple when you are confronted that in practice, how to coin it. So I think colleagues will also share that, how easy that was.
I don't see questions. Anna, Corinne, then I'll suggest we move to case studies. You have 4 case studies. Let's look at 2 of them, and then we'll have another short exercise with me, but not as complicated as a toothbrush, I promise.
Would you like me to show slides for everyone? The first speaker, I think, is Christine, or
yeah, would you be able to do that, Corinne?
Do that now, yes.
Can you hear me well? I'm not, my earphones are not working. So
we hear you perfectly well.
Right.
So this is just an overview of the case studies that will be presented. I can't paste the link to that in the chat, but I pasted it earlier. It's on the events page if you want to read it in your own time. There you go. Here you go.
Yeah, I can start here. I'm Christine from the Norwegian Elixir node. And I will present the first case study that we did in this training, hands-on training event in November, where we were a group of people trying to map out the impact of a course, massive open online course as part of an EU-funded project. And the main Elixir impact area of such an activity would be human capital, skills development, but it could also go under research efficiency, because hopefully things will go smoother for people after attending such a course. Thanks. So with this case study, we wanted to illustrate how an activity such as running a course, open online course, could lead to an impact via outputs and outcomes. And this included a common or brainstorming activity related to finding activities that are relevant when you organize such a course. So you would map out training needs, you would identify and or create training material for the course, you would have to set up an e-learning platform for the course. You would of course run the course itself and collect the feedback afterwards. So these are all activities that you do. Next, please. And then we map the direct outputs of the course. So after this course, you would have learning material available for later use. You could have an improved version of the course after having taken the feedback into account. And of course, the participants would have increased their skills in the field. And both, as we learned from Jelena and Elina, both the activities and the outputs are very much within our control. We can directly control what we do and what we provide and build. And then for the next slide, we have the longer term effects of running such a course. And we move beyond what we can control. This is within our sphere of influence, but we can no longer directly control. For example, that the participants use the new skills that they have learned. We can see an increased usage of the e-learning platform itself. We have this knowledge now available for all openly. And we can see an increase in the knowledge of open learning And then next. And then finally, we looked at the long-term effects of running such a course on both science and society. And then it becomes a bit more vague and difficult and blurry, because we don't have any control or influence of what happens. We can just observe and try to document and note down. And hopefully now the participants can do great stuff with their new knowledge. It could be great science or great work otherwise, depending on the nature of the course. We could observe that scientific breakthroughs are being made. Participants can advance in their careers. Funders of the course can be happy and will keep on funding the course. And since material is openly available, we can also hope to see a reduction of inequalities. Next, please. And this is all good, but then we need to monitor. We want to monitor to prove the value of what we do. So how can we collect evidence? And now you see the very busy red notes coming up as a result of a brainstorm in the group, trying to find out how we can collect evidence of each of these items. So as also Jelena and Elina said, in the blue boxes, it's easy to collect evidence. You collect number of participants, amount of training material and so on. But then as you move on to the impact, it's harder and harder. So if you go down to my last slide, we just focus on one of the pathways from running the course to making scientific breakthrough. I'm aware that this is not a societal impact directly, and that is the focus of the project, but still this is what we came up with. So for running the course, you would typically collect number of participants and you would document them, and most people, most organizations already do that. You could document the skills by the immediate survey that you send out after the course is done. They would normally say if they've learned anything or not. But to document if they have used these new skills in their work, you would have to send a follow-up survey after maybe 6 months to ask if they have used their new skills. Then to see if they actually do great work, you would have to follow up with an even longer term survey to ask them what they have accomplished with their new skills. And another way of doing this to documenting that they do scientific breakthroughs would be to find publications made by these participants and track the citations to these. Again, it's a long and hard process to do in this case. And, thanks. I think it's over to Kim on the next. I think we collect questions afterwards. Is that correct?
Yes, hi all. My name is Kim. I'm from the Belgian Elixir node. And the case study we worked on with our group in November was on developing and operating a bioinformatics service. It's something I think every node in Elixir is doing as part of the activities, of course, as Jessica just mentioned out some time ago. So that could be a database, a software tool, a tool, for example, to submit data to open data repositories. The main impact area we focused on here was research efficiency, but by doing the exercise, and it will be shown later, you will see that other impact pathways will pop up, which is not surprising as many of the activities are intertwined as the metaphor of the tree is. Can I have my next slide, please? So let's start from the left to the right. We start with the activities and the outputs, which are most easy to define because, of course, we are in the sphere of control here and we decide many of these things ourselves. So for a tool or a database to develop, we need to identify the data needs and the data sets. And then we need to actually develop or amend the service. What we also want to do is organize trainings for the users so that they know how to work with it. And to make people aware that the thing exists, we need to publish an article of the service. When we go to the outputs, so that are the things that we mention in our project, like the key performance indicators. Yeah, we have to deliver the service. That's the first one. We also have to deliver the training material and the guides. And we have to know that the users are aware of the existence of the service. So then we move to outcomes, which are the green boxes. Now we are in the sphere of influence. So as mentioned before by Elina, most important that we measure that, but what it is in fact. So we want the service that we have developed that is actually used by the community. Another goal we could have there is that added value services are built on top. And also, for example, that what we develop is integrated in pipelines of others could also be a desired outcome here. With the training material and the guides, we aim for community creation. And with the awareness, and I think, yeah, we can add always more arrows here, but the use of open data will be stimulated by the specific tool we are developing here. So if we then go to impact, we see that the upper part of the pathway will lead to research efficiency, making the research easier, better facilitated, more efficient, which brings us to the research efficiency pathway. But if you look to the bottom of the image here, you will see that we also touch upon the policy influence impact area. And yeah, this is pointed out because the use of open data is stimulated, and this is an item that can position your research infrastructure in the field and in the attention of policy influence. So in the next step and in the next slide, we started by adding the evidences. So how do we measure all of this? As mentioned, the ones on the left are easy to measure, the ones on the right are very difficult to measure. It's a very busy slide. I will not talk on everything. You can have a look afterwards. This will all be available. But if we go to the next slide, what I show you here is just the upper part of the pathway, which is the research efficiency pathway. And if we look to the activities there, so the evidence for measuring, the data needs, the data sets could be done by a survey. Sometimes you don't even need a survey. You need from what is going on in your field, what is needed. You need to develop the service, so you need to put some persons on that. So in your funding, you will need to allocate some person months for that. So for the output, of course, the release of the service is a very easy measurement. It will also be a KPI in your project. And then for the outcomes, for us, the most interesting ones, because you want to see, has it been used, what we have been working on? So you want to know if the service is used by the community. You could have a look to usage data. You could also have a look to how many times your key article has been cited by others, as this is also a criterion of impact. And then the fact or the thing that added values services can be built on top. You can also make it a quantitative measure by just counting the number of extended services and if it is integrated in existing pipelines. And then going to the actual impact that the research is becoming more efficient, difficult to measure it, could be done by estimation of time savings, but I think a better way here could be the narrative approach. If people really illustrate that what you or your research infrastructure has created is helping them, will really attract the attention and can ensure further funding of your RI. So that was it for me. The slides will be available, so you can have a look to all the other evidences and the other pathways here as well. Thank you.
So it's my turn now to present on the third case study that was worked on during the training last November. So it was a big project. the title is there, covers 2 lines: investing in storage/compute for infrastructure operators to accelerate the creation of data assets for others to use in their research. So it's a big project, and I will focus really on one pathway as part of this this big endeavor. So this is actually at the thinking stage in our Australian partners, and Rhys Francis was part of that team, and he came up with this brief. So it was brilliant for me to work on it with him and the others. So the main Elixir impact area is clearly research efficiency, making things faster, easier, more integrated. Here is really for the benefit of the end users of the future data asset. And by data asset, we mean, for example, a reference genome, because it would be very inefficient if every researcher had to first build their reference genome before they can do the much broader analysis. So it's really logic to provide these to them so that they can do the added value research on top. Just like a local government is building roads for you and train lines, so you don't have to build your own road to go to your own job. Okay, so it's kind of a logical thing. Of course, other impact areas are likely to be triggered, and I'm thinking in particular human capital. I think somebody needs to be muted. David, please do it. So human capital is another impact area that is triggered because first, to realize the project, the ambition of having data assets online for others to use, you might need to upskill your research infrastructure operator. So there's like internal training elements. But also, if you give out reference genomes to researchers who don't really know how to use them, that's pointless. So there's an element of external training as well. So just to show you the typical simplified impact pathway, this logical chain. So activities and outputs are shown here, and I will really only focus on one of the branches because otherwise we would spend the day on it. Again, very much in your sphere of control. Here, for the new data assets to be available for end users, where you need to create them, right? And you also need to make sure somebody's actually going to need them. So maybe you want to scope the needs in advance of starting to create things that maybe nobody's going to use. Moving on, the outcomes appear. As you can see, we've just put 2, but you could have 10 if you wanted to be more comprehensive. So here we move in the sphere of influence. So if we take the green box in the middle here, so the end users, they may use your data assets, your reference genome. Of course, there are a number of conditions to be met. First, they need to be good reference genomes. They must be needed by someone. The users must know these are available, that they exist, and they must have the skills to use them. So the latter point, that is what I covered in my introduction. So the end users need to have the skills to use these data assets. And that's actually the bottom line of that framework, this training elements that I mentioned. About the end users knowing that the data asset exists, it's not pictured here in this framework, but we could put it there. Basically, there's no point creating much needed data assets if people are not told they exist. So you would need to have dissemination activities planned in. And we didn't specify this on this impact framework, but this is something to consider. No point keeping your reference genomes in a drawer for nobody, in a cloud drawer for no one to ever use them. So you need to tell people. Finally, moving further into the sphere of interest, where you don't have that much influence anymore, you just hope what you have done is going to have some sort of impact. If you design your work well, normally you should be able to tease out some impact that you can claim. So at the end of the day, it is the hardest bit to measure, okay, but it's probably what's the most interesting when you're going to speak to your funders so that they continue funding your research infrastructure. They might resonate more with stories around impact than stories about your activities. I ran 100 training courses. Okay, that's nice, but what I'm interested in, did people actually use those skills to solve bigger problems, to gain new scientific insights of societal benefit? So this, I'm bringing the word funder here because at the end of the day, we are public funded. So there is somebody that we need to please, and it's the public funder. And so we need to provide them with evidence. And I use the word evidence as an overarching word for narratives, KPIs, indicators, whatever. You know, evidence is whatever you're going to present and that is going to resonate with the end audience, especially those with the money. So let's just take two examples. Very left of the impact pathway. When you scope your data assets to make sure there is a need, well, you're going to do an end user consultation. Your piece of evidence is the result that you have carried out this end user consultation, and you probably have even a report. So box ticked. If you go on the right side of the impact pathway, well, you would not believe, but even having information on the number of users of your data asset might not be so easy, because if people can access them freely over the cloud without even registering, which is the case actually in the bioinformatics world quite often, it's not so straightforward. It's not like when you are running a particular accelerator and people need to apply to use the tunnel. Here, people just take the stuff, run away, do great science, and they rarely come back to tell you about it. So you need to put in place a system to be able to track the use of your reference genomes, for example, and ideally not just, oh, 100 people use them every day. It would be nice to know also what they do. So there are ways to do that. It's not an exact science, but it's very powerful. So I hope this was inspirational. The slide will be available so you can explore the whole framework if you want, and I'm really grateful to the project participants.
Okay, it's my turn. Thank you to my colleagues that spoke before me, because they really open large avenues for what I'm going to say. I'm not going to introduce myself again. Our case study was about cooperation in an industry engagement program. And what I am trying to do here is to show you another way or another perspective of looking at this impact pathway. What I would like you to consider now is that you are planning your project, and you start by establishing your impact goals. So what do you want to achieve in the end? And then set up the rest. So I will not go into so many details, but I will try to challenge you in another perspective. This work was also done as straightforward as those examples that were already shown by my colleagues. The challenge was to establish and run an industry engagement program. And the main Elixir impact areas were relationship capital, but as you'll see, it will also benefit other research topics like research efficiency. And the benefits are those like working together, facilitated knowledge sharing and cooperation, bioinformatics resource uptake, and as I mentioned already, research efficiency, doing it faster, easier, and more integrated. So Corinne, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So just consider here 3 steps. We will jump the outputs, but they are implicit. So the impact goal that we want to achieve, and this we would like to impact these areas of relationship capital and bioinformatics resource uptake, and also research efficiency. So we are establishing our final goals. Where do we want to touch with what we are going to do? Can I have the next, please? So the impact that we ambition is that innovation is fostered, that contribution to bioinformatics applications of societal benefit is achieved, like good health, food security, and so on, and that research is more efficient. So to achieve that, then we start putting the bricks backwards. So what outcomes do we need? And we need to have increased awareness by the industry of Elixir and its resources. We need increased appreciation by industry of Elixir and its resources, and we need industry-created data that are more open for science, sort of to being recycled and getting additional value by all players. So then again, the reasoning is the same. So to achieve these outcomes, what activities do we need to put in place? And what we need to put in place, or what we thought we need, would be running a network, networking events from Elixir resources providers and the industry, build capacity within Elixir to interact efficiently with industry, and co-design and run projects with industry. So this is a very simple example just to give you the mindset that we may use to set up our project when we want to consider impact, let's say ex ante. So of course that now we would need to establish indicators for all these activities, outcomes, and impact, and also to have the evidence, like the number of participants, as was very much evidenced, the training itself. So the evidence is for the activities that we have put in place. Then again, the evidence is for the outcomes. For instance, evidence of post-event satisfaction survey, testimonials, and things like that. Evidence of resource usage, evidence like lists of examples, and it is so nice if we can use this approach when designing a new project, because then perhaps monitoring what we will do and monitoring the impact we are building becomes more clear. So this is my contribution.
Just one thing to say, as you can see, we had 4 different speakers, different approaches. You can go left to right, right to left. It's the sky is the limit. There's no real rule in the impact evaluation world. This is what I've understood, as long as you do things logically and you start first by looking where doing your, I guess the only thing that you need to do for sure is first do your impact framework before you start measuring things right, left, and center, because it really helps you to measure the right thing rather than measure things that you can't make any conclusions of.
Okay, so are there any questions that someone in the audience would like to bring? If not,
No,
perhaps
Nicholas has a hand.
Sorry, please go ahead, Nicholas.
And this is maybe more of a side note than a special case, because it's about CONVERGE, the CONVERGE project, and I mean, there's a lot of narrative in the project, in plan and so on. Has this been mapped out in these sort of in this framework? I think that will be very useful. I think that will help the project a lot if it was.
So the Elixir CONVERGE project, for those who are not familiar, is a project involving all Elixir nodes across Europe with the purpose of improving data management. And of course, it's got many more angles than this, but it's really about doing what Elixir does best, is to provide nicely available, curated, relevant data, software, training, all aspects for the world to use and do things. And then these things, we don't always know what they are, but we know they are necessary because people come back to use the resources constantly. Whether or not we have done an overarching framework for the CONVERGE project, we did not at proposal stage because Horizon 2020 didn't yet ask for this. So, but if this was an Horizon Europe project, we would have had to make one. So we escape on that part. So no, we haven't. We have done frameworks for parts of, for some activities, and I believe for work package 1, we did one as a tool to brainstorm. And this is something I should say, sometimes your impact framework is like your dirty laundry. It's an internal thing that you use to make decisions, to understand exactly what your activities are contributing to, what sort of outcomes, but you don't necessarily showcase it to the world. You don't publish your impact framework, really. You know, especially us scientists, we would feel so uncomfortable because it's not exact science. So, but in any case, yeah, so we've done some for some activities, but the thing is, when you do an impact framework, it has to serve a purpose. So you do it and then you make decisions based on it. So we have to make sure that whoever undertakes to create one for a specific project, then it doesn't just sit there. If it gives us funding, that's great. If it makes us deliver better, that's even better.
Yeah, I was thinking about the latter because
yeah,
it could help us deliver, I think.
Yeah, but I guess you have to also have everybody engaging. And it's a bit of an unfamiliar tool to most of us in the, well, I would say research world. Of course, in the international development world, you would never get any funding if you didn't have an impact pathway, which is called many different names, all the way to theory of change or logical frame, etc. But up to now, we never had to do that for getting funding. It's only starting now, I see, with Horizon Europe. Probably the Wellcome Trust ask, but we rarely get asked for this, and it's a shame. But there is this, we need to accept to go out of our comfort zone and make use of this as a tool, even if we are a little uncomfortable with, you know, the causality element. Oh, how can I claim that my training course or program led to improvements of digital skills at EU level? Well, yeah, it did. You contributed to this, but nobody's going to, you know, claim that you have, you know, provided skills to 50,000 people. But still, you have done your bit.
Corinne, I wonder if we can take up Jessica's question from the earlier part. But Jessica, maybe you want to reframe it or repeat it. Maybe now it's a different type of question.
Not really a different type of question. More, how do we, all these bits and pieces, so the showcases that you had, for instance, the case studies, all of this fits into maybe one research infrastructure. Who should drive such a project to get everything together, for instance? What role description suits a person to coordinate such a job, to put all these puzzle pieces together? And yeah, I'm so inspired, so my head is just, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, already arranged with Jessica and Nicholas to have a coffee here in Stockholm because I'm in Stockholm. So we'll continue the discussion. Christine, is your hand to respond to that question? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, or more to ask a follow-up question to Jessica. Do you mean to collect and gather all the impact of all the activities and look at the total impact of the infrastructure? Is that what you're thinking, to demonstrate the whole impact of NBIS?
I mean, that would be, I mean, one thing and one outcome, which would, I guess, be really good in terms of funders or maybe policymakers or something to show. But the pathway all up to there, I'm thinking, are great exercises in order for me to, I mean, I understand this work needs to be done all the time, as with strategy. It's nothing that you just do one day every year and then you leave it. It's an ongoing thing. But all the exercise would help me improve my activities in my part of the research infrastructure, which happens to be training. And then I have Niklas, who has another more focus, but all of these parts go together for the whole infrastructure to work as one machinery. So the impact, yes, it's important, I would say, maybe for the director or whoever writes all the grants to get more money. And it's important for me, for my specific thing, to know how I can improve different things, maybe. So I don't know if that was helpful, Christine, sorry for that.
I'm not really sure what I can reply, but
how do you do it in your nodes, for instance?
It's me at the moment. If you ask for the roles, I'm the node coordinator, and it's on me, but I think that's more or less because we set up this study based on a previous staff exchange that we had with Anna and Francesca and Corinne. So that just landed on me because I had the interest, and then now I'm starting to collect or select the relevant people among our node to help me do this.
And just a question then, I'm sorry for hijacking you, but is it then that you select the different pillars of your node that is important, like training, we should do that for that, we should do it for database because that is what we are, yeah, how do you select?
Yeah, that would be the ideal, of course, but in reality you select the people that you think will be able to get the ID and do the work.
Yes.
It's not always the same, but that's what we have done. So we have gathered a small group and we have started mapping out and had one workshop, and we will soon have another workshop focusing on another service that we do, and then we may expand the group of people that we have included for the brainstorming. And we just take it in blind, I think.
But that you had a keyword there, that's nice. So you do it for the services that your node provides. So that might be something, and that every
we will break it up into the different, but not necessarily like a bioinformatics service as the one Kim presented, but our help desk activity as one service that we focus on. And we focus on, in the first workshop, I will present this in a show and tell in April. That has not been announced yet, but it will come. So we focused on our training on data management. That was the first case study we picked up. And in the next workshop, we will focus on our e-infrastructure platform, Norwegian, NELS it's called, and to see how that happens and take it from there. Very vague questions and very basic approach.
Thank you, Christine, for sharing. Anna, I see your hand, but just to build on that from our experience about who to involve. So Jessica, if I understand correctly, if you decide to choose a particular activity around training, as you say, and you have people working with training, it's a good place to start. What we see in practice is the more varied group you have in chatting the pathways, the more interesting the outcome. So for example, you can have your colleagues, but maybe already in discussing training, you need to involve Nicholas and his team in order to get this additional input, because otherwise you'll probably get what you already know in terms of impact, unless you involve people who are not directly involved in what you are doing from the beginning.
Yeah, so what I kind of afraid of the silo effect, but including people from, like, you might minimize that risk and you have new eyes on the thing. Yeah, thank you.
Anna, I see your hand.
Thank you, Jelena. So just share our experience and also my perspective. I think that monitoring impact is as important as a management tool as it is the strategic monitoring tool, where you confront your outcomes or your outputs to your strategic objectives and the goals that you have for the infrastructure. This being said, and as Corinne already mentioned, this is a sort of a new field in research as a common habit, and also in management terms. I haven't seen in any management course the impact area as part of the loop for managing whatever the organization is. So it is coming in slowly. In our node, and starting in the collaboration that we had with Christine and Francesca from the staff exchange that we held a few years ago, what we have done is that we started with small activities and engaging with those people that were coordinating those activities, and ask them for providing the indicators, but at the same time delivering them some background on how we were going to do the process. So we try to engage with them and have them not only accountable, but also involved in the process. But I think that the overall process of monitoring impact should be responsibility of the CEO together with its team, because it's part of a high level view of what the infrastructure or the organization is being done.
Maybe if I could build on this, I've done formal training in impact methods, of course, to a very amateuristic level compared to Elina and Jelena, but just to equip me with the basics. In large organizations, I'm thinking the big charities of the world like Médecins Sans Frontières or the Wellcome Trust, they do have teams of what is called MEAL experts. So that's monitoring, evaluation, assessment, and learning. In that team lies the responsibility to put together these either project-based or organization level impact frameworks, whatever they like to use. I think Wellcome Trust likes the theory of change, but another organization might use something else. And it's the responsibility of the head of that unit to work with all parts of the organization to deliver basically the objectives that are set in this impact framework to achieve the goals that everybody has agreed on. So the goals, it's basically the impact areas. It's the right-hand side of the framework, and what they will do to deliver them are the activities on the left-hand side of the framework. And it's also the responsibility of these MEAL officers to monitor and to collect evidence continuously for the activities, outcome, impact of whatever they have agreed to do. So this is what is done in the international development sector, for example, or big charities who are able to have this sort of approach and to employ the right number of people. If we look at Elixir as the distributed infrastructure, it's just to share my own experience. At the hub, there is really just half of me who is doing this MEAL portfolio, this monitoring, evaluation, assessment, and learning. The other half is about international relations. So we had to strategically decide what we can do. And because we are a distributed organization, we decided that I would do a little bit of impact evaluation of Elixir wide, and as part of a number of previous events, we've started to present, for example, how we measure scientific impact, how we measure relationship capital, in our own probably amateur ways, but this is what we can do because I'm not an economist, I'm just like you. And the other half, the other strategic aim, is to build capacity across Elixir in the countries. So it's the people like Anna, Kim, Christine, Francesca, who were part of the staff exchange, who are now part, and many of you on this call today are part of the follow-on project that's called Impact Evaluation at Node Level, Getting It Done. And I'll put the links in the chat if you're interested. So this is all about learning together. We will not, at the end of the journey, become economists, but we will use some basic tools to do things a little bit better and to be able to have stronger arguments for, in a way, our long-term sustainability. Because this is what the ultimate aim is of all of that. It is about us being able to maintain the infrastructure in the future to continue pleasing our funders. And because we have so many different funders, international, national level, all with different needs and expectations, we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach. Hence why the strategy of giving the tools, the knowledge to the Elixir people to do it, to at least have something when the funders come asking for evidence, and they do. And it is very scary when they come in June asking you for information by the end of August, please, on number of people you have trained and how many people access your services and how many people from the country and how many people from that country. And you need to have all this evidence somewhere ready for use. And so this is a bit what we're aiming at, making your life easier when requests come, and they do come. Jessica.
There you touched upon a really important point, right? So most of us Elixir nodes, at least we in Sweden, we have this, it's not just one funder. It's like we have multiple funders, like you say, they are, some are overlapping what they expect and some are not, or there are small details that differ, and then it kind of changes the whole thing, or yeah. So is one good starting approach to also start listing what do they expect, what do they want in the end of the year, and out of that, what we know that they want number of participants or number of people that use the surveys. If we do a survey, so the kind of how we monitor the tools for those things based on what they want in the end. I don't know if I made myself understandable there. And my second question, what did you say? What was the MIL? What does that stand for?
I'll put it in the chat if you want.
Oh, thank you. Yes. But do you see my point? That's so I don't do exercises and then in the end of the year, I have missed something because I have not measured something that funder X wanted me. If I already know the output, so I can tailor-made the ways I need to measure things along the way.
Jelena, maybe you want to answer, and then
that's why I raised my hand. Yeah, it's a bit of reverse engineering approach here, Jessica. That's why I mentioned that you do have KPIs, all of you do, and probably from different sources, from different type of funders. So one natural way would be to look, so what are these KPIs? So which activities these KPIs are linked to, and maybe start from there. Because as I mentioned, we believe KPIs are linked to activities and outputs. So what are you in control of? They're not indicators for impact. So I would say, yes, start with the KPIs you are contractually obliged to deliver on. And
I forgot about the KPIs. Of course, that is what I meant. Of course, thank you.
Yeah. And then chart the pathways. That will be the beginning. And I would say in charting the pathways linked to that KPIs, the best outcome would be if you could show the non-linear pathways. So if the KPIs are directly related to your training activity, but in your pathway, you can chart the logic that at the end it will I don't know, it will increase the the application of girls to study STEM subjects. So the totally societal benefits with the training element attached. This is not necessarily what your funder would have expected, but if you show that this actually linked, that will be a beautiful way to show how the path, how the impacts emerged from your, let's say, traditional activities. Corinne?
Yeah, maybe I can build on this. You know, when I arrived at Elixir and I started on this impact portfolio, so apart from having the unique opportunity to be on the RePath project with Elina and Jelena, which was transformative, I also did basically a scoping of whatever was already measured in Elixir by various people, whether it was numeric indicators, quantitative stuff, or more narratives, you know, portals with lots of data on them. So I came up with that long list and then classified it in activity, outcome, impact type thing to just give me an idea of what sort of evidence was there, because already requests were coming in from the outside world. So it's again a bit reverse engineering, but I needed to be ready to reply with, because sometimes you only have a few days or a few weeks to respond to these requests for information. So you need to know where to look. So that list was extremely useful to me, and it's probably not very complete. Yet, I would prefer personally if we could have Elixir-wide indicators, KPIs, you name it. But I've soon realized after just a few months, it was going to be impossible, because we get these very scary and important stakeholders such as ESFRI, the European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructure, and the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, coming up with lists of indicators. And I put some in the chat just to show you. So these guys came up with a list. And because ESFRI is a landmark research infrastructure for ESFRI, we will have to report on these. So somehow we lose a bit of the control here. We have to really do what we are asked to do. Of course, there will be a middle way, because we cannot deliver data for each of these indicators how they are spelled. So we will give them what we can. But it also means that I don't have full control of how we do impact things. It's a bit of reactive and a bit of proactive, but it's really usually to meet the needs of external people. Because we are, at least the Elixir Hub is co-funded, so I don't have, the Elixir board is not too demanding. They haven't given us a list of indicators, which is great, but others have, so we have to work towards that. Elina.
I just wanted to mention a point that wasn't, I think, still raised. Indeed, the impact framework, whatever you develop with the first go, you know, with the broad impact areas and, you know, these very branchy impact pathways, it's indeed a strategic management tool, as Corinne said. It's internal, it's your understanding of the way impact evolves. But what I think hasn't been mentioned yet, it is your first understanding. So if that impact, if the strategic tool sits inside your organization, it actually allows you to cater for these external needs, because yes, you will not reply directly to ESFRI indicator, but you actually can say something about an area because you have an understanding of how that goes. What it isn't mentioned yet, I think, is the fact that, and I think Corinne said, well, how can I say about the causality? It's just my assumption. Yes, at this point it's just an assumption, but imagine if you 5 years track a certain causality, and then you realize that throughout those 5 years, you actually have now much better detailed understanding whether that causality is right because you have data, or whether there is, you know, a bit more subtleness in that causality. So over years, if you work on that understanding, you can also see how it evolves, and you can make more precise adjustments to those pathways. So you basically ascertain or you validate the causality throughout the years. And that is an important point why that strategic internal tool is very important. And people know about it.
If I may, Corinne, I'd like to say something else I was reflecting on when we were discussing. We also do work with national funders, just to maybe perhaps put your mind a little bit at rest, because we believe unless we all of us start talking the same language or separating performance indicators from impact measures, we'll be in a mess. So as much as possible through our projects, we do try to talk to national policymakers. And in case of some infrastructures we worked in charting the pathways, we actually involved their funders, like members of the General Assembly, into this creative process of charting, just to see which direction do they think. And usually when these conversations start, people will bring the environment they operate in. So national policymakers will bring their funding requirements and the KPIs which are sitting there. So maybe not an initial step for those of you who haven't worked on impacts yet, but maybe for the future to think at which stage to involve your national stakeholders, national funders into discussing impacts with you. So that's something I think will help the community.
I should say, getting to know your national level funders is great, because they can be really a mutually beneficial relationship when they are aware of what you're doing and you better understand their needs. So it's everything to be gained there. I'm just looking at Anna and the time. Is it time to move on to the next item? Or
yes, we should move on to the next intervention. I think it is, I'm not sure if it is Jelena or Elina.
Well, we are just really wrapping up here, so we only have one slide to show you. But I think we all need a little stretcher. So if you want to stand up, because I'm sure you have meetings after that. So if you don't have time, just a simple stretch exercise. You don't need to put cameras on, but the important part, they put your hand in front of you with your thumb down, and the other hand with thumb down going over, interlocking the fingers, and then let's do a little stretch to the left and to the right. And Elina, you can start sharing your screen if you want. We're busy exercising here. And to the left and to the right. Okay. Elina, we are now all attentive. The blood is circulating, at least in our backs and arms. We are ready.
Actually, just a couple of summary points, what we already discussed, just to leave you with some key takeaways. I think we discussed it all, but I think it's good to summarize it one slide. I think one of the key things that every single research infrastructure is a complex system of interactions. And we talk about impact, we need to think about interactions. And without that understanding of interactions, or sort of system view on what you're doing within the broader society and economy, there is no this general picture. So all in all, there is no one size fits all framework for impact, socioeconomic impact assessment, and it's clear. But there are guidelines where you can inspire of the I think general high level impact pathways that happen. So one is RI Path 2. The other things are various case studies from research infrastructure. So you have, I think, guidance to work in order to think about what the pathways are. Obviously, every single research infrastructure then needs to think in more nuanced ways what is applicable to the case. And in case of Elixir, that work has been invested. So Corinne has been driving the review on really selecting the impact areas of Elixir, and now with a charting of these pathways through these case studies, we also work through the actual pathways. So it needs to be a tailored impact framework. Even at the very first stage, it's rudimentary. It's probably not extremely detailed. It might have actually causalities that aren't tested yet, but it's important to have it as the draft. As I said, over years it can be improved and refined once you learn how are the correlations really the way you assume them. And the overall, it's important for this framework to be there because it will be the pathways will have basically, when you start charting the pathways, you'll have loads of cobwebs of relations, and you might get lost in all the cobwebs. But it's important to remind that it's at the research infrastructure strategic level to think about these cobwebs and select those pathways that are really important. These are the things that your research infrastructure really thinks, this is what where my most impact is materialized. This is what I want to track. You won't be able to track everything, and you don't have to, but you need to have that simplified view on the pathways that are really important, that you want to narrate to your funders. And it's this view of the pathways is important because we need to prioritize understanding before measuring. I think that point was covered very well today and repeatedly. And another thing, that once you have that overview, a very manageable framework of pathways and areas of impact, it's also the selected indicators should be manageable, right? So yes, you will not be able to trace everything, but you have to see what is easy to collect and you already hold, where it definitely you need to put additional effort, and what can you do quick and dirty at the expense of very expensive processes, because at the end you have very limited resources. So that is also a strategic decision on the selection of those indicators, and then think through how you are going to collect these indicators. So all in all, the emphasis on really placing meaningful, selecting really meaningful and feasible indicators. And once that's there, I think that's your picture, that's your framework, what you can play with and what you can also reference to your external stakeholders as well as to your staff members to explain what has been achieved. So this is, I think, very short summary points, and that's all from my side.
Thank you, Elina. And we always like to conclude any interaction with us all thinking about the major takeaway we're all taking from a meeting or from today. So that was my question in the chat. What is one major takeaway you're bringing with you from today? And thank you for posting here. Impact is very interesting and very cool. We definitely think so. Do you follow up survey on your training courses for long-term impact evaluation? Very glad to see, Tanya, a very concrete outcome of today's discussion. Better understanding of how the framework can be used strategically. So indeed, strategic use of the framework. Focus on measuring the outcomes. Kim, I like that because, as you mentioned, activities and outputs I now control. Let's take the next step, outcomes, and once you're comfortable with measuring that, you'll be moving to measuring impact as well. List of indicators and impact to help building a proposal. It was fantastic, not fantastic, it was interesting to see that Horizon Europe ended up with impact, and we never thought about that when working on RIPAS, and I can clearly see how this pathway logic, it can be applied there very easily. So that was, and an unplanned impact of RIPAS, how about that? Document indicators currently being collected to see what's missing. Yes, that's Corinne, what you were saying at the beginning of RIPAS when you did this housekeeping. Tree image, it's always helpful for people who like especially work with images and the framework itself.
And I'd like to thank you all for being with us this morning, and hope this was useful for yourselves and for your projects. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.